A new year brings a new exotic armor tier list, or at least an updated one. Welcome back to the exotic armor tier list, where as usual, we're going to start with Titans. I will be using a similar system to the previous list, where we'll talk about which exotics are best for which subclass, along with where any neutral exotics may come into play. However, a quick disclaimer. If you've been keeping up with Destiny over the past year, then I don't think any of this is really going to be news to you. The only reason certain exotics may have shifted in a significant way is because I've slightly shifted the way I weigh exotics in the tier list, with PvE now prioritizing Legend, Master, and Grandmaster content, followed by other lesser pinnacle reward sites. This is due to the fact that in Legend, Master, and GM content, the game actually demands somewhat of a curated and effective loadout, whereas in other lesser activities, the stakes aren't high enough to demand one. Any other shifts in the tier list will come from a reassessment of last year's list. We're going to start with the newest exotics introduced into the game dating back to Season of the Worthy with CITAN'S Ramparts. This exotic allows you to put up a barricade that you can shoot through, but it has less health and a shorter duration. This has been much more of a PvP menace than a PvE one. In PvE, I am still uncomfortable relying on Tower Barricade for protection, as even just the tiniest bit of splash damage coming around the side is enough to nullify the wall. While I'm sure there is some utility in higher end content for this exotic, it's not something I think you need in order to be successful, as barricades are often used for defensive purposes. PvP, on the other hand, CITAN'S has much more utility and still requires some effort to bring down, although if it is brought down, you are left in a very vulnerable position. Most players will often avoid confronting a CITAN'S wall unless they have a lot of special ammo to burn. I see this getting plenty of use in PvP, and would recommend it for more passive players who are sniping, using long-range weapons, or are in more intimate settings like Trials. Next up, we have the two Beyond Light exotics, Precious Scars and ICEFALL Mantle. Precious Scars generates an overshield aura for you and nearby allies after you are revived or you revive somebody else. I haven't seen this used much at all in either PvE or PvP, and I think that's mainly because of the "it's only good when you're dead" rule. Ideally, it's better to have exotics that are working all the time, as opposed to when you are dead. This aura basically just makes it so the overshield that you get from someone lasts 10 seconds after a revive, but it does give an aura to everyone else nearby, which is fine, I suppose. But to spend your entire exotic on something like this, to me, is just not even close to worth it. In GM content, enemies are going to tear through that overshield anyway, and something like the Protective Light mod is going to get the job done here just fine in terms of giving you survivability. In PvP, this has some niche use in Trials, potentially setting up a team-wide overshield in order to attack, but there are definitely better options out there that can help you win, as opposed to maybe not losing. ICEFALL Mantle had a ton of hype when it was first revealed, but sort of fell to the wayside once its limitations were known. You're able to convert your barricade into an overshield, but you lose all movement capabilities besides walking. The timer on your overshield also is refreshed every single time you're hit. In PvE, this is a nice little extra chunk of health for yourself whenever you feel the need, but in lower end activities, the stakes aren't there for you to need this. And in higher end, again, most enemies are going to rip through that shield anyway, and being limited to walking speed in a GM Nightfall is more or less a death sentence. Plus, again, barricades are good for protection and revives. Having a barricade is good. This has a bit more viability in PvP, where you can afford to lose some movement in favor of needing to be shot in extra time to be killed. However, with the PvP meta being all about speed as of this video, perhaps losing your movement capabilities to maximize these overshields is really not worth it to more aggressive players. Finally, new in Season of the Chosen, it is the Titans' first and currently only Thunder Crash exotic, CUIRASS of the Falling Star. Greatly increases your Thunder Crash impact damage and gain an overshield that lasts longer the farther you travel before crashing. I really don't know if you could ask for much more when it comes to a Thunder Crash exotic. A great PvE option for those on the subclass, and for PvP, the Overshield lets you escape that animation lock that you get stuck in after you're done with a little bit more ease. This is also a great swap exotic for PvP. Those are the new ones. As for updating last year's list, not much has really changed, like I said at the start. If you've been keeping up with Destiny, then none of this should be a surprise to you, although some rankings will be shifted due to my new rating system being weighted differently. If you are a Striker Titan, assuming you're mainly doing high-end content like Master and Gym Nightfalls, I think CUIRASS easily overtakes Insurmountable SKULLFORT as the Striker Titan exotic for PvE. Being able to instantly eliminate a champion on Master or providing a massive burst of damage on GM is miles ahead of putting yourself at risk of death when using SKULLFORT. But as the difficulty of the activities you're doing drops, the more valuable SKULLFORT becomes, although being able to instantly kill some Striker Gambit bosses is still very appealing with CUIRASS. As far as PvP goes, SKULLFORT is still the subclass-specific champion, but your entire focus needs to be on spamming Shoulder Charge, otherwise you should just run with something else. Swapping to CUIRASS or Eternal Warrior is also definitely an option. In the Sentinel world, nothing has really changed. Helm of Saint 14, Doomfang, and URSA Furiosa are still the picks, and all of them remain viable. Although, I would put Doomfang first, then URSA, then Saint 14, although you could swap Doomfang and URSA if you wanted to. Helm of Saint 14's strength comes from its very protective ward, blinding enemies and providing a massive damage resistance. But GM Nightfall champions, specifically Unstoppable champions, don't really seem to care about any of those things whatsoever, so please be aware of that. In most other cases, I would recommend Doomfang Pauldrons for its extreme offensive capabilities. URSA Furiosa has some good use in higher-end Nightfalls that have particularly lethal areas, I'm looking at you, Glassway, allowing you to have an oh crap button a large portion of the time, since you'll be taking a lot of damage while your banner shield is active, thus restoring your super. For PvP, Doomfang is obviously going to be the way to go, thanks to its offensive potential. For Sunbreaker, my recommendation continues to be Phoenix Cradle with bottom tree hammers. The damage boosts and the energy gains are too great to ignore. Although the higher the difficulty, the higher it is to utilize sunspots, as chaining them relies heavily on consistent ability kills. HALLOWFIRE Heart lost some of its power a little while ago due to Hammer Strike debuff nerfs, but it's still viable. I think people actually sleep on Hammer Strike nowadays just because we're so used to having Divinity. It's still a good ability. I just like Phoenix Cradle better for team play, and Cradle also works for solo play. In PvP, if you're able to master the Fusion Grenade, then you'll really want to consider Middle Tree Sunbreaker with Ashen Wake, since Ashen Wake fully restores grenade energy on a kill, and you can make your fusions one-shot someone if you have stacks of Roaring Flame active. As for PvE neutral exotics, there are a lot here, but ultimately my opinions from last year haven't changed, because none of the exotics in last year's list got changed. Exotics mentioned last year were Armamentarium, Crest of Alpha Lupi, Heart of Inmost Light, Peregrine Greaves, and WORMGOD Caress. I suppose we can add the Aeon Gloves to the mix as well, but they're almost in their own category due to how they work, and I don't plan on covering them in this video. I'm going to try to keep this section brief because I've said all of this already. Armamentarium is for those who don't really want to think too hard. You just get an extra grenade, that's it. It's viable, but you can get more value out of something else if you put in a little more effort. However, with Stasis providing the benefits that it does, being able to throw an extra Stasis grenade to proc some effects is pretty good. Stasis doesn't really have any exotics tailored to it, so this is a nice neutral way of boosting your Stasis game. Crest of Alpha Lupi for PvE isn't the strongest pick, but it's still a decent one. Extra Orb on Super, barriers give a boost of healing when you're in danger, it's not bad. I wouldn't bother with it for lower difficulty stuff, but higher end things, it definitely has some value, especially since you can use it very frequently, unlike Ward of Dawn, which has a hefty cooldown. Combine this with the Protective Light mod, and you'll be a lot tougher to kill than you think. Conceptually, I am still interested in Heart of Inmost Light with its emphasis on ability usage, but I have found that Phoenix Cradle and Bottom Tree Sunbreaker fulfills that fantasy without nearly as much of the cost being the thought process of which order to use my abilities. Not to mention that Sunspots will buff other people when you're using Phoenix Cradle. This still has plenty of usefulness, but you need to be smart around your abilities. This is not something you just throw on. Peregrine Greaves, they're a very fun exotic, but they're not one that I can take seriously at all. I tried to give some benefit of the doubt last year. I'm sure you can make them work for some fun insta-kills and niche builds, but they never really broke into the mainstream, and they're going to stay niche. WORMGOD CUIRASS continues to be a personal favorite of mine, although one I haven't used in a little while, thanks to its large burst damage potential. Combining this with a 1-2 punch shotgun leads to some ridiculous damage. But again, the higher the difficulty, the more difficult it is to use this exotic due to incoming damage. A lot of this is also going to be massive overkill damage on red bar enemies, assuming you're working with 5 stacks of the buff. So you'll need to prioritize majors, ultras, and champions to get the most value out of this, otherwise you might as well just punch stuff to death with a different exotic. I'm gonna add ACTIUM War Rig to the list here as I think it's just on the fringe. Automatically loading auto rifle and machine gun ammo into your weapons has proven quite useful in specific circumstances. Garden of Salvation final boss with Xenophage, Season 12 Xeno Warmind Cell spam, sweet business. It's a niche option to say the least, but it is one that can be effective under those niche conditions. Moving to PvP. Things that used to be all about One-Eyed Mask until it got nerfed to remove the tracking portion of the exotic, and from there, it just kind of fell off. But it still has plenty of viability and is arguably one of the top PvP exotics still. It's just not as good as it used to be. Titans have a ton of neutral options when it comes to PvP. CITAN'S, DUNEMARCHERS, Antaeus Wards, Armamentarium, Lion Rampant, Crest of Alphalupi, SYNTHOCEPS, and ACD Zero Feedback Fence. And they're all viable in some way. We're going to skip over CITAN'S since we already talked about it, go to DUNEMARCHERS. DUNEMARCHERS received a buff almost a year ago to give it an even bigger radius of effect, 20 meters. And it is still 20 meters. Behemoth and Missile Titans will get the most out of this exotic, although I would also encourage Top Tree Hammer Titans to give this a try as well, as the debuff from Hammer Strike will cause people to die to the lightning effect if they're hit by the debuff. With Stasis being flavor of the past, 5 months now, it is tough to ignore the power of DUNEMARCHERS, being arguably the best PvP exotic for Titans. Antaeus Wards seemed like they were a flavor of the month exotic thanks to Titans being able to slide ridiculous distances with stasis, but have fallen off a bit, more of a sleeper right now. They were fixed a little while ago to not allow in some chip damage. These are a higher skill exotic, and demand a certain aggressive playstyle to really make the most out of these, especially considering the timing windows you need to hit to activate the perk. This is not something I would really suggest to the average player just looking to mess around in PvP. Armamentarium giving an extra grenade in PvP could be the difference between winning and losing a game, maybe provided you're using stasis. It can almost guarantee a frozen target, although at a high price. Still, having multiple freezing grenade options at your disposal is never going to be a bad thing. It's decent on other subclasses too, but stasis makes this shine. Lion Rampant is a movement exotic which I normally do not like to grade because changing your movement capabilities isn't something that can be measured in terms of how much power you gain. That being said, with people flying around all over the place in Crucible lately, it seems that enhanced movement is really prioritized right now, and I don't see that changing for a while. If you can make these work for you, then more power to you. Crest of Alphalupi is something I feel flies under the radar. Being able to heal yourself has proven to be a massive benefit year in and year out in PvP. You're able to survive encounters you normally wouldn't, you're able to re-engage much sooner, plus, since you need to pop a barricade to proc it, you stay safe while doing it. Not to mention the frequency at which you can do this. However, defense isn't really flavor of the month, so I do understand its lower use rates. SYNTHOCEPS continue to be a solid option for aggressive players, and considering the state of the Crucible in 2021, that's nearly everyone. Diving into a crowd of people can result in big team wipes thanks to the increased damage from being surrounded, and the bonus lunge range is always going to be helpful. I think DUNEMARCHERS are still a bit more popular due to the ability to tag people from really far away with damage, but I would not question your choice of exotic if I saw you wearing these. ACD-0 Feedback Fence is more of a defensive option as a way to potentially win some melee fights that you didn't start. If you're attacked with a regular punch melee attack and retaliate with a punch of your own, it'll take 2 more punches to kill you compared to only 1 punch needed to kill your attacker, assuming all normal health levels. With how aggressive PvP is right now, this is a great way to potentially punish people who get the drop on you with melee attacks, and it's completely passive, meaning you don't need to actively manage it at all. It is just something that happens. Finally, we have the rest of the exotics. These are the exotics that are just kind of there. They might have some use or fit in some very niche build, but are otherwise considered unremarkable. In the HELM slot, we have Eternal Warrior, KHEPRI'S Horn, and Mask of the Quiet One. Eternal Warrior is a swap exotic. You swap to it when you have super, and then you swap off when it's over. KHEPRI'S Horn is a fun meme, but doesn't really have that much power, and Mask of the Quiet One's effect, while decent, just isn't the most potent. In the arm slot, we have Stronghold, aka that sword exotic. Maxes out guard stats, and blocking right before something hits you will heal you. It is very good at what it does. It's just that what it does has never really been something that has had a ton of value in the sandbox. Chest armor, we have Severance Enclosure. This exotic never really took off with the explosion effects. I think we have enough explosive effects to go around, and this just doesn't see a lot of use in higher end content. Boots, we have Peacekeepers and Mark 44 stand-asides. Peacekeepers rely on SMGs being really good, and even though there are some very good ones right now, to invest that much into making an SMG just slightly better hasn't really been worth it. Mark 44s are also not a terrible choice, but fall into a similar category as Feedback Fence, where there are just a couple of exotics that fit that aggressive role a little bit better. That being said, you can use the overshield portion to your advantage while moving around the map in PvP. Titans, we got it pretty good. In the grand scheme of things, we might not have the most outrageously strong roster of exotic armor, but we do have many, many solid options. Overall, though, the landscape of exotic armor power levels has not drastically shifted. Again, the main reason for any significant shifts in my rankings compared to last year is because of a reevaluation of their true usefulness and because I've weighted things a bit differently this time around. Warlocks, y'all are up next. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.